Controversy is something Gino Jennings is comfortable with. He has been at conflict with other Christian denominations and opponents for years due to his conservative views, which include nontrinitarianism, a rigorous clothing code, and a strong opposition to women in clergy posts. His opinions have provoked strong reactions, leading one nation to ban him. The news has finally broken, and his relatives have confirmed everyone's worst suspicions. But before we dive into the specifics, let's review Gino Jennings' journey to this point, shall we? Even as a daring and divisive personality now, Gino Jennings wasn't always like that. Like many children, he began by reading aloud from the Bible to his family during church sessions. But unlike most, Jennings was giving sermons at the tender age of 13. Gino Jennings was brought up in a religious household. He came from an extremely devout family that made sure that going to church regularly, studying the Bible, and praying were all aspects of daily life. A major figure in his life was Bishop Ernest Jennings, his father. A spiritual advisor, role model, and mentor all in one. The early attraction of young Gino to the pulpit was, however, not unexpected. Even though he was just a teenager when he began preaching, his passionate and assured delivery of sermons set him apart from his contemporaries. Jennings made a big move at the tender age of 21. He created the first house of worship for the redeemed in the Philadelphia basement of his family's home in 1984. The church swiftly began to expand, despite its small origins, due to the impactful preaching of Jennings on holiness, simplicity of life, and fidelity to the Bible. His no-nonsense approach attracted listeners, and the underground movement he launched in a basement quickly became a national phenomenon. "I don't want to stay local," Jennings said. He dreamed of his church's influence expanding globally. His lectures resonated with so many that he started churches in major U.S. cities like New York and Washington, D.C. Later, his message spread over the world, and churches sprung up in countries like Canada, Jamaica, the United Kingdom, and even some regions of Africa. Jennings was able to reach a wider audience through his sermons, which were frequently broadcasted on radio and television. However, there has been some debate surrounding Jennings' ascent. Many people are divided by his teachings, including his anti-gay and divorce stances and his opinion that women shouldn't be in positions of leadership within the church. When he finds conventional Christianity straying from biblical truth, he criticizes it openly. According to Jennings, a lot of churches have changed their beliefs to adapt with contemporary culture. Still, he won't budge from his conventional, uncompromising view of the Bible. Some have praised and others have criticized Gino Jennings for his literal reading of the Bible. Concerning issues of morality and gender in particular, many find his inflexible position to be intolerant and out of touch with modern times. Nonetheless, Jennings maintains unwaveringly that his beliefs are derived entirely from the Bible. He believes it is his responsibility to speak the truth, no matter how unpopular or difficult it may be. Not only does Jennings have strong opinions about gender roles, but he is also an outspoken opponent of the prosperity gospel, the belief that one's loyalty is rewarded by God with earthly success, health, and plenty. In some Christian circles, this teaching has grown rather popular. It encourages people to give freely to the church in the hopes of reaping divine blessings. Because it distorts the gospel message, Jennings rejects it. He often attacks prosperity preachers in his sermons, saying that they utilize his followers for financial advantage and promote a watered-down form of Christianity that prioritizes worldly success over personal development. Rather than seeking material prosperity, Jennings argues that Christians should live lives of sacrifice, humility, and service to God. Those who believe that religious consumerism has moved away from Jesus' teachings will find common ground with his criticism of the prosperity gospel. It does, however, set him at conflict with a number of prominent modern-day Christian figures. Jennings has a history of contentious opinions, most notably regarding modesty. By referring to scriptures that exhort modesty and the rejection of lavish ornamentation, such as 1 Timothy 2:9, he emphasizes that women should refrain from wearing makeup, jewelry, and having their hair trimmed, so that they might remain holy and separate themselves from the world's materialism. Particularly in a culture that holds individual liberty and expression in high regard, his position has, unsurprisingly, provoked some resistance. Many people think his beliefs are patriarchal and limiting because they don't give women enough control over their bodies. Jennings has insisted on his position despite the criticism, stressing that his beliefs are unaffected by societal forces or cultural trends because they are based on Scripture. Jennings has sparked passionate public debates with various Christian leaders due to his steadfast stance on these matters. Jennings has retaliated against pastors who have accused him of legalism and strict fundamentalism by saying that they are pushing a watered-down form of Christianity. He has become a divisive figure among Christians due to these conflicts. His unwavering stance has driven a wedge between his admirers and his detractors. Jennings sees himself as a protector of genuine Christian teaching in a day of moral relativism, thus he stays devoted to his message despite the persistent criticism. Jennings has had to juggle the responsibilities of his ministry with those of a public figure, which is no easy feat when you're the leader of a huge religious institution. Although most people don't know much about his private life, it's not unusual for prominent figures to go through tough times. While the public seldom sees the emotional toll that juggling ministry and private life takes on a pastor like Jennings, who has devoted his life to his faith, it is probable that he draws on his spiritual convictions to help him cope with loss and grief. Evidently, Jennings has, like everyone else, probably gone through times of sadness and loss that have tried his faith and determination. For one, Jennings frequently stresses that Christians should lean even more heavily on their faith during times of personal sorrow, believing that God still has a plan even when they are hurting. Consistently encouraging his followers to embrace adversity as a part of God's plan for spiritual growth, Jennings undoubtedly models his own approach to accepting loss after this concept. His leadership is characterized by resiliency, which he displays in these lectures. Bold stances on contentious issues and unwavering biblical interpretations define Gino Jennings' ministry. A devoted fan base and many outspoken detractors have resulted from this. Misunderstanding and inaccurate portrayal of his messages in the media has been one of his greatest obstacles. Although Jennings is devoted to sharing the Bible as he understands it, his reputation has taken a hit among those who aren't aware with his ministry due to his harsh delivery and strong views on social and theological issues. Jennings has been the subject of numerous harsh media portrayals throughout his career. His frank criticism of contemporary culture and conventional Christianity has made him a convenient target for his detractors. His most contentious remarks are frequently the center of media attention, which can lead to a misunderstanding of his larger theological arguments due to their presentation out of context. The impact on Jennings' reputation from this type of representation is substantial, especially for those who learn about him from news articles instead of his actual sermons. Consequently, a lot of people think of him as an extremist or radical. In contrast to his role as a pastor who claims to be defending the Bible. Misrepresentation in the media is nothing new for Jennings. Similar obstacles beset many religious leaders who advocate for counterculture, particularly in this era when discussions of social inclusion and political correctness predominate. Many contemporary people find Jennings' views on sexual morality, gender roles, and modesty to be antiquated. And those who disagree with him often find his sermons offensive, abrasive, or out of date. Gino Jennings argues that many self-proclaimed Christians do not follow the Bible to the letter, which is why he prefers the term holiness over Christianity. A lot of people find it polarizing since his passion for holiness implies that his particular interpretation is the only one that is really faithful. Conventional Christian teachings are in odds with Jennings' non-Trinitarian views because they advocate for a singular understanding of God rather than the conventional Christian notion of the Trinity. His unfaltering honesty has been a hallmark of Jennings' ministry, even in the face of public misconceptions and unflattering media coverage. No amount of pandering to the public will ever convince Jennings to water down his message or change his stance. Even though it may cause him some discomfort, he is determined to remain true to his mission and is prepared to face criticism if necessary. The fact that Jennings continues to stay steady despite criticism is a reflection of his strong belief that his vocation as a pastor requires him to preach the truth of God, regardless of how controversial it may be. When Gino Jennings took up the challenge to debate famous Jamaican entertainer Mr. Vegas in 2018, it made news across the island. Because Jennings had caused a sensation with his controversial opinions on the appropriate clothing and makeup for Christian ladies, the event was greatly anticipated. A big media event was the argument that Mr. Vegas publicly requested since he disagreed with Jennings' strict interpretation. Tensions were noticeable as the discussion progressed. The remarks made by Jennings earlier that had caused the incident were played repeatedly by Mr. Vegas, who was adamant about doing so. But Jennings wouldn't let the recording play, so the two got into an angry argument. Security took Mr. Vegas out of the auditorium after a violent incident involving the church's audio and visual team, several associate pastors, and Mr. Vegas swiftly escalated the situation. The incident went viral across the island of Jamaica when the live-streamed debate on YouTube attracted enormous attention from viewers around the world. Two other ministers who had agreed to debate Jennings eventually backed out, likely because of the severity of the situation, causing the confrontation's aftermath to have a domino effect. This incident demonstrated how divisive Jennings' ministry is and how difficult it is for him to defend his opinions in public. Conflict with T.D. Jakes is another big obstacle Jennings has had to overcome. Gino Jennings and D.M. The theological disagreements and ministry philosophies amongst Jakes are emblematic of larger disputes within the Christian community. The practice of same-sex marriage is at the heart of their fundamental disagreement. Prone to outspoken opposition to same-sex marriage on the grounds that it goes against biblical teachings, Jennings is well known for his unwavering commitment to Orthodox Christian dogma. Jakes, on the other hand, has taken a more tolerant stance, which Jennings sees as watering down Christian doctrine. According to Jennings, Jakes has been too lenient on matters such as LGBTQ+ inclusivity, which he sees as a break from Scripture. Their divergent views on the relative merits of traditionalism and inclusion also contribute significantly to the underlying tensions. The emphasis on doctrinal purity by Jennings stands in sharp contrast to the modern emphasis on racial unification and social justice. Concerning issues like gender roles and modesty, Jennings frequently takes a firm stand, and he has publicly condemned Jakes for what he perceives as his efforts to satisfy contemporary culture at the price of biblical truth. Because of their differences, Jennings has publicly challenged Jakes and invited him to debates, claiming that he was deceiving his congregation with his erroneous teachings. In his sermons, Jennings has been somewhat critical of Jakes and has challenged him to justify his theological views in front of an audience. Unfortunately, these discussions have not taken place, therefore the disagreement has devolved into a rhetorical war, fueled by religious media and their respective fan bases. Public and media coverage of this conflict has drawn attention to the contrasting pastoral philosophies of the two groups. Jakes aims to reach a wider audience with his more diplomatic and inclusive manner, in contrast to Jennings's fiery and uncompromising personality. This difference has schismatic among their adherents and echoes a deeper schism in contemporary Christianity regarding the relevance and interpretation of Scripture in the context of our present world. Besides his disagreement with TD, it includes his confrontation with Steve Harvey. The public and media paid close attention to the highly publicized and controversial spat between Gino Jennings and Steve Harvey, which erupted over the former couple's divorce and subsequent remarriage. The disagreement stems from Jennings's rigid interpretation of biblical teachings about marriage, as is typical of his conflicts. It is considered adultery, according to him, to remarry while one's first spouse is living. A viewpoint that demonstrates his firm belief in strictly following the Bible. A fundamental tenet of Jennings' teachings, this perspective has frequently sparked debate, particularly when put into practice. Steve Harvey, on the other hand, challenged Jennings' dogmatic viewpoint. He is a famous comedian and TV host who has been through a divorce and remarriage. Harvey took exception to Jennings' remarks because he felt singled out, which, in his opinion, was too critical and didn't take into account the nuances of contemporary relationships. Harvey contended throughout their conversation that Jennings' perspective ignored the complexities and difficulties that many people have while dealing with marital problems. As the public feud between Jennings and Harvey heated up, Jennings finally challenged Harvey to a formal debate. Their heated debates, which highlighted their divergent opinions, were extensively circulated online and included their confrontations. There was heated debate among their followers as a result of this conflict, with adherents of both camps defending their leaders. It also brought attention to the gap between religious teachings on marriage and modern social standards. The public's view of divorce and remarriage in Christianity was significantly shaped by the controversy that ensued from this dispute, which sparked wider cultural and religious discussions. Conflicts between Jennings, who remained firm in his belief in the inerrant Bible, and Harvey, who took a more human and practical approach to relationships, showed how difficult it is for religious leaders to deal with complicated, real-world problems in a culture that is always evolving. It was inevitable that Gino Jennings' divisive opinions would eventually have repercussions beyond the usual level of criticism. Because of his strong opinions against the LGBTQ+ community, he was barred from entering Australia in 2019, which was a major setback for him. Australian authorities found hate speech and incitement to violence in Jennings' sermons, which were marked by a literal interpretation of biblical principles. His strong stance against same-sex marriage and homosexuality, which he frequently discusses in his sermons, led him to this conclusion. Much discussion on free speech and religious expression ensued in response to the ban, as one would anticipate. Those who stood with Jennings said that he was only expressing his religious views and that his right to free speech should cover his actions. While his messages were provocative, they said, they were based on his understanding of the Bible. Jennings' detractors, however, argued that his lessons promoted homophobia and other forms of bigotry against the LGBTQ+ population. This dispute brought to light the persistent differences between long-held theological views and modern social mores, especially as they pertain to LGBTQ+ rights. This incident highlights larger social discussions on the boundaries of free speech and the associated obligations. A more sensitive attitude toward hate speech was shown by the measures taken by the Australian government, especially in relation to underserved populations. The debate over Jennings' prohibition highlights the difficulties religious leaders encounter when trying to practice their faith in today's pluralistic and multicultural culture. Considering these changes, the predicament of Jennings prompts vital inquiries into how one can, in a multicultural setting, both defend their beliefs and honor the rights of others. Everything about it is a sobering reminder of how complicated modern conversations about religion, identity, and social norms can be. A combination of misfortune, criticism, and distortion have defined Gino Jennings' life. But what has kept him going as a leader is his resiliency and unwavering faith. Regardless of the backlash he received for standing firm on biblical truth, his church grew in both the United States and abroad. He has a strong global influence, which speaks volumes about his devotion and spiritual strength, and he is still a prominent person in his religious community. In spite of all, Jennings' reputation as an ardent preacher of the genuine gospel he believes and lives on. Both his position in the religious world and the breadth of his influence have been cemented by his unfaltering faith and his dedication to preaching the message of holiness. A strong sense of purpose has guided Jennings' ministry for decades, allowing him to remain steadfast in his message even when confronted with a world that frequently disagrees with his strict interpretations.